The sound of a beer mug slamming against wood cracked through the kennel house like a gunshot. Every head in the bar turned toward the corner booth, where 6 figures in civilian clothes sat sprawled across leather seats that had seen better days. The largest of them, a man built like a refrigerator with arms thick as tree trunks, had his combat boots propped up on an adjacent chair, mud still caked on the soles. "Hey, waitress!" Bryson Holt's voice carried the particular arrogance of someone who had never been told no in his entire 26 years of existence. "Another round over here, and maybe move a little faster this time, yeah? We don't got all night." Laughter erupted from the table, 5 other voices joining in. The kind of laughter that wasn't really about anything being funny. The kind designed to make someone feel small. Claire Donovan stood behind the bar counter, a serving tray balanced in her hands, and said nothing. 37 years old, 5'4", 120 pounds soaking wet. Brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that hadn't seen a salon in months. She wore the standard kennel house uniform, a black polo shirt and jeans, both slightly too big for her frame, as if she were trying to disappear inside her own clothes. At her feet, lying on a worn cushion that Pete kept specifically for this purpose, an old Belgian Malinois watched the room with eyes that had seen too much. A scar ran from his left ear down to his neck, the fur there growing in white and patchy. His muzzle had gone gray years ago. "Oh, look at that!" another voice chimed in. This one belonged to Derek Sloan, a wiry man with wire-rimmed glasses and the perpetually smug expression of someone who had graduated top of his class and never let anyone forget it. "She's got a dog, a real mangy-looking one, too. Hey, sweetheart, does your dog even know how to sit, or does he just lay there waiting to die?" The dog, whose name was Odin, did not move, but his eyes opened fully now, tracking the speakers with an alertness that seemed at odds with his aged body. Claire loaded the drinks onto her tray. 6 beers, 1 whiskey neat. She moved toward the corner booth with steps so quiet they barely registered on the hardwood floor. About time, Lieutenant Megan Ashford didn't look up from her phone as Claire approached. The lieutenant was everything Claire wasn't. Tall, blonde, immaculately groomed even in off-duty clothes. Her manicured nails, painted regulation-appropriate nude, tapped against her screen in a rhythm of barely concealed contempt. "Put them down and get out of my sight. You're blocking my light." Claire placed each drink carefully. Bryson's beer first, then Derek's, then the others. When she reached for the whiskey neat, Megan's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. "Did I say you could touch my drink?" The grip was tight, unnecessarily so. Claire's expression didn't change. "I apologize, ma'am. Where would you like me to place it?" "Ma'am?" Megan laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You hear that? She called me ma'am. Like she's military or something." She released Claire's wrist with a dismissive flick. "Put it down and go clean something. That's about all you're good for, isn't it? Cleaning up after real soldiers." The table erupted again. Senior Chief Victor Tran, a compact man with a permanent scowl etched into his features, shook his head but said nothing. Specialist Corey Dunn, the youngest of the group at 23, was already filming on his phone, capturing the moment for whatever cruel social media post he was planning. Claire set the whiskey down and turned to leave. Wait. Bryson held up one massive hand. "I want to hear her talk more. Come on, dog lady, tell us about yourself. What's your story? You work here because you couldn't hack it anywhere else? Or are you just too stupid for a real job?" In the far corner of the bar, a man sat alone. Commander Nathan Briggs had been nursing the same whiskey for the past 40 minutes, watching the scene unfold with the practiced patience of someone who had commanded men in situations far more volatile than a Virginia beach bar on a Thursday night. 52 years old, silver at his temples, eyes that missed nothing. He didn't intervene, not yet. Above the bar, mounted on wood-paneled walls covered in military memorabilia, photographs of dogs and handlers stretched back decades. Black and white images of Vietnam-era scout dogs, color photos from Desert Storm, more recent prints from Iraq and Afghanistan. One photograph, positioned near the corner where the light didn't quite reach, showed 50 military working dogs standing in formation in what appeared to be a desert landscape. They were arrayed around a central extraction point, bodies positioned outward like the spokes of a wheel, guarding something, or someone. The caption beneath it read, "Operation Silent Leash, the 50, 2019. No one at the corner booth noticed it. No one ever did. Claire returned to the bar, where Pete Garland was already pouring another round for a group of regulars at the other end. Pete was 63, built like a barrel, with a gray beard that hadn't been trimmed since his retirement from the Marine Corps 12 years prior. He owned the kennel house, had named it himself, and had very specific rules about what was and wasn't acceptable behavior within its walls. He watched Claire approach, noted the slight redness around her wrist where Megan had grabbed her, and said nothing. Some things weren't his to say. "They giving you trouble?" he asked instead, voice low enough that only she could hear. Claire picked up a rag, began wiping down the already clean counter. "Nothing I can't handle, Pete? I know you can handle it. That's not what I asked." She paused. For just a moment, something flickered across her face, something old and tired and impossibly heavy. Then it was gone, replaced by the same neutral mask she always wore. "They're fine," she said. "Just loud." Pete grunted. He'd known Claire for 5 years now. She'd walked into his bar one morning with a resume that listed nothing before 2019 and asked if he was hiring. He'd taken one look at her, one look at the dog at her heels, and hired her on the spot. He'd never asked about her past. She'd never offered. Some things were better left buried. The door swung open, letting in a burst of humid Virginia air and 2 more figures. Gunnery Sergeant Rosa Delgado walked in first, a woman in her late 30s with close-cropped black hair, and the kind of muscular build that came from years of working with animals that outweighed her. Behind her came Private First Class Ethan Park, barely 20 years old, with the eager expression of someone who still thought military service was glamorous. Rosa's eyes swept the room with practiced efficiency, cataloging exits, potential threats, and points of interest. When her gaze landed on Claire, it lingered for half a second longer than necessary. She'd been coming to the kennel house for 3 years. She'd watched Claire work. She'd noticed things, the way Claire moved, too quiet, too controlled. The way her eyes tracked movement in her peripheral vision without ever seeming to look directly at anything. The way she positioned herself, always, with her back to the wall and clear sight lines to every entrance. Muscle memory, Rosa had thought more than once. The kind you don't learn in waitress training. She and Ethan took seats at a small table near the window, ordered their usual, and settled in to watch whatever was about to unfold at the corner booth. Because something was going to unfold. Rosa could feel it in the air, the same way she could feel a storm coming hours before the first drop of rain. Back at the corner booth, Derek Sloan was holding court. "The problem with the old training methods," he was saying, gesturing with his beer in a way that sloshed liquid over the rim, "is that they were entirely reactive, entirely based on outdated behavioral models. Now, at the academy, they taught us about conditional response matrices." "Conditioned response," Claire said. She was passing their table again, empty tray in hand, heading toward a group of regulars who needed refills. She hadn't meant to speak. The words had simply slipped out. Derek's head snapped toward her. "Excuse me?" Claire stopped, closed her eyes for the briefest moment. When she opened them, her face was blank again. "Nothing. My mistake. No, no, no." Derek set his beer down, leaning forward with the predatory interest of a cat that had just spotted a mouse. "You said something. You corrected me. By all means, enlighten us. What did you say?" Around the table, attention shifted. Megan put her phone down. Bryson cracked his knuckles. Even Senior Chief Tran, who had been largely silent until now, turned to look. Claire stood very still. "I said conditioned response. What you were describing is a conditioned response, not a conditional one. They're different terms. It was just a minor correction. I apologize for interrupting." Derek's smile widened. It wasn't a pleasant expression. A minor correction from a waitress to a petty officer first class who just completed advanced K-9 behavioral training at the Naval Special Warfare Center. He stood slowly, unfolding his wiry frame to its full height. "Tell me, sweetheart, what exactly do you know about military working dogs?" The bar had grown quiet, not silent, because bars are never truly silent, but quiet in that particular way that happens when people sense entertainment coming. Conversations at nearby tables trailed off. The regulars at the bar turned on their stools. Even the jukebox seemed to lower its volume. Claire's hand tightened on her tray. Her knuckles went white for just a moment before relaxing. "Very little," she said. "I misspoke. Please enjoy your evening." She turned to leave. "Hey!" Bryson's voice cracked as a whip. "He asked you a question. You don't walk away when someone's talking to you. That's rude." He was on his feet now, all 6'4" of him, moving to block her path. Derek here spent 18 weeks learning about military dogs. 18 weeks of intensive training, and you're gonna correct him? A waitress who probably can't even train her own mutt to fetch? By the bar, Odin had risen to his feet. He didn't growl, didn't make any sound at all, but his entire body had shifted into a posture that anyone with military experience would recognize instantly. Alert. Ready. Waiting. Pete noticed. His hand moved slowly beneath the counter, toward the Louisville Slugger he kept for occasions that rarely arose. Commander Briggs noticed too. He set his whiskey down, his attention now fully focused on the confrontation unfolding across the room. Rosa Delgado reached for her phone under the table, ready to call base security if things escalated. But Claire just stood there, small, quiet, seemingly helpless against the wall of muscle and hostility blocking her path. "I don't want any trouble," she said. Her voice was soft, almost meek. "Please let me pass. Please let me pass," Megan mimicked in a high, mocking tone. "Oh, honey, you should have thought about that before you opened your mouth." She joined Bryson, standing beside him with her arms crossed. "You know what I think? I think you're one of those wannabes, the kind who hangs around military bars hoping to pick up a real soldier. Am I right? Is that what you are? A badge bunny without the bunny?" Corey Dunn snickered, still filming. "Badge bunny, that's good, Lieutenant." Claire's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly, but it was there. "I work here," she said, each word measured and controlled. "I serve drinks, I clean tables, that's all. Before we continue, if you're a veteran, active duty, or military family member struggling with the transition back home, you're not alone. Operation Homefront provides critical financial assistance, housing support, and family programs for military families in need. The link is in the description. Now, back to Claire, because what happens next will change everything these canine handlers thought they knew about training military dogs. Megan took another step forward, close enough now that Claire could smell her perfume. Something expensive. Something that didn't belong in a place like this. "That's all?" Megan repeated. "Then why did you correct Derek? Why would a simple waitress even know the difference between conditioned and conditional response?" Claire said nothing. "Answer me when I'm talking to you." Still nothing. Megan's hand shot out, grabbing Claire's chin, forcing her face up. "I said..." What happened next took less than a second. Claire's free hand came up, wrapped around Megan's wrist, and applied pressure to a point that made the lieutenant's fingers spasm open involuntarily. The movement was so fast, so precise, that by the time anyone registered it had happened, Claire had already stepped back, out of reach, and Megan was cradling her hand with a shocked expression. "Don't touch me," Claire said. Her voice hadn't changed, still soft, still measured, but there was something underneath it now, something cold. "Please." The bar held its breath. Megan stared at her own hand like it belonged to someone else. What did you... "Pressure point," Derek said slowly, his smugness replaced by something closer to uncertainty. "That was a pressure point release. A trained one." His eyes narrowed behind his glasses. "Where did you learn that?" Claire picked up her tray from where she'd dropped it. Her hands were steady, her breathing even. "Like I said, I serve drinks, that's all." She walked past them, back toward the bar, and this time no one stopped her. But every eye in the kennel house followed her. At his corner table, Commander Briggs picked up his whiskey and took a long, slow sip. His expression hadn't changed, but something in his posture had shifted. He was no longer merely observing, he was evaluating. Rosa Delgado leaned across the table toward Ethan Park. "Did you see that?" Ethan nodded, eyes wide. That was combat training. That wasn't self-defense class YouTube tutorial. That was real." "I know." Rosa's gaze tracked Claire as she disappeared behind the bar counter. "I know exactly what that was." At the corner booth, Senior Chief Victor Tran had gone very quiet. He was the oldest of the group at 44, and unlike the others, he had actually seen combat. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He'd worked alongside military working dogs, had seen what they could do, had known handlers who had given their lives alongside their canine partners. He'd also seen that technique before, the pressure point release. It was taught in a very specific program to a very specific subset of personnel. "Derek," he said quietly, "sit down." But she just... "Sit down." Something in Tran's tone made Derek comply without further argument. Even Bryson and Megan returned to their seats, though Megan kept rubbing her wrist with a bewildered expression. Corey Dunn had stopped filming. "Senior Chief?" he asked. "What's wrong?" Tran didn't answer immediately. He was watching Claire, watching the way she moved behind the bar, the way she positioned herself at angles, the way her eyes never stopped scanning the room, even as she wiped down glasses and restocked bottles. "That woman," he said finally. "Something's not right about her." Megan scoffed. "She's a waitress, Victor. A nobody who got lucky with one trick. That wasn't luck." Tran pulled out his phone, opened a secure browser. And that wasn't just one trick. Everything about her, the way she walks, the way she stands, the way she reacted, that's training. Deep training. The kind you don't get in civilian life. So what? Bryson shrugged his massive shoulders. Maybe she was military once, washed out, dishonorably discharged, ended up here pouring beers for people who actually made it. Wouldn't be the first. Maybe, Tran began typing, but I'm going to find out. Across the bar, Pete Garland handed Claire a glass of water. "You okay?" Claire drank half of it in one swallow. Her hand was shaking now, just slightly, a tremor that hadn't been there during the confrontation. "I'm fine." "You didn't have to do that. I could have stepped in." "I know." She set the glass down. "I shouldn't have reacted. It was stupid." It was human. Pete leaned against the counter beside her, lowering his voice so that only she could hear. "Claire, 5 years I've known you. 5 years I've kept my mouth shut, never asked questions, never pushed. But right now, I need you to tell me one thing." She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since she'd started working here. Pete had eyes like her father used to have, kind but knowing, the eyes of someone who had seen too much of the world's ugliness to be fooled by its masks. "What?" she asked. "Pete, are they going to find anything? When that senior chief runs your name through whatever database he's accessing right now, is something going to come up that I should know about?" Claire was silent for a long moment. Then, "No, nothing will come up." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She turned back to the bar, began organizing bottles that didn't need organizing. "My file is... It's classified, Pete. Above his clearance level. Above most people's clearance level." Pete absorbed this information without visible reaction. "Classified how?" "The kind of classified where the file doesn't even exist unless you have specific authorization to know it exists." She paused. "I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner." "Told me what, exactly?" But before Claire could answer, the door to the kennel house swung open again. This time, the entire bar went silent. The man who entered was in his mid-50s, heavy-set, with a face that had been weathered by decades of sun and sand and sleepless nights. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, and a windbreaker, but he carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone who had spent his life in uniform. Master Sergeant Frank Holloway hadn't set foot in Virginia Beach in 3 years. Hadn't been back to the States in 18 months. There was no reason for him to be at the kennel house on this particular Thursday evening, and yet here he was. His eyes swept the room once, twice, and then stopped, on Claire. The color drained from his face so completely, so suddenly, that for a moment it looked like he might collapse. His hand shot out to grip the doorframe, knuckles white, breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "No," he whispered. The word was barely audible, but in the silence of the bar, it might as well have been shouted. "No, that's impossible." Claire had gone rigid behind the bar. Odin was on his feet now, positioned between Claire and the newcomer, his body tense but not aggressive, waiting, always waiting. "Sir?" Ethan Park called out from his table. "Are you okay?" Holloway didn't respond. He was still staring at Claire, his face a mask of shock and something else, something that looked almost like grief. "You're dead," he said, louder now. "I was at the memorial. I heard the rifle volleys. You're dead!" Every conversation in the bar had ceased. Every eye was fixed on either Holloway or Claire. The tension in the room had shifted, transformed into something charged and dangerous. Commander Briggs rose slowly from his seat. "A Master Sergeant," he said, his voice carrying the calm authority of command. "Are you feeling all right? Do you need medical attention?" Holloway finally tore his gaze away from Claire, noticed the commander for the first time. His training kicked in, years of discipline overriding his shock, and he snapped to something approximating attention. "Commander Briggs, No, sir. I don't need a medic. I just..." He looked back at Claire. "That woman. Do you know who that woman is?" Briggs glanced at Claire, who had pressed herself against the back wall of the bar, one hand gripping the edge of the counter so tightly the wood was creaking. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes were fixed on Holloway with an intensity that bordered on desperate. "She works here," Briggs said carefully. "She's a waitress. Her name is Claire." "Claire!" Holloway laughed, a broken sound that held no humor. "Is that what she's calling herself now? Claire? Master Sergeant, I think you need to sit down and—" "That woman," Holloway interrupted, pointing directly at Claire with a trembling finger, "is Ghost Mother, Master Chief Renata Caldwell, founder of the Phantom Pack program, the most decorated canine handler in naval special warfare history." His voice cracked. "And she died in Kandahar province 6 years ago." The words hit the room like a shockwave. At the corner booth, Derek Sloan's glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. No one moved to clean it up. Megan Ashford's mouth was opening and closing, but no sound came out. Bryson Holt, who had never backed down from anything in his life, had gone completely still. And Senior Chief Victor Tran, his phone forgotten in his hand, was staring at Claire with an expression of dawning horror. "Ghost Mother," he breathed. "The myth, the legend, the woman who trained 50 dogs to hold an extraction point for 14 hours against an entire enemy battalion. That Ghost Mother? She's not a myth." Holloway's voice was steadier now, though his eyes were wet. "She was my commanding officer. I served under her for 3 years. I was there when they told us she didn't make it back from Operation Silent Leash. I was there when they gave her the posthumous Medal of Honor." He took a shaky breath. "And I'm telling you, Commander, that woman behind the bar is her. I'd know her anywhere." Claire hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. She stood like a statue, pale and frozen, while her carefully constructed world crumbled around her. Pete stepped forward, positioning himself partially between Claire and the room. "I don't know what's going on here, but I think everyone needs to calm down. Frank, you are clearly confused. This is Claire Donovan. She's been working here for 5 years. I've seen her ID. I've run her background check. She's just a civilian." "A civilian?" Holloway shook his head. "A civilian who just executed a perfect pressure point release on a trained military officer? A civilian whose dog," he pointed at Odin, "is wearing a tag that I guarantee has a handler designation on it?" All eyes turned to Odin. The old Belgian Malinois sat perfectly still at Claire's feet, his graying muzzle pointed toward Holloway, his eyes bright and alert despite his age. Around his neck, half hidden by his fur, hung a metal tag that glinted in the bar's dim lighting. "May I?" Commander Briggs asked, already moving toward the bar. Claire's hand shot out. "Commander, please!" But Briggs was already there, kneeling beside Odin with the kind of careful respect one shows a fellow warrior. The dog didn't growl, didn't move, just watched as Briggs reached for the tag. "Easy, boy," Briggs murmured. "I just want to look. I'm not going to hurt you." He turned the tag over in his fingers, and his face went white. "Commander?" Rosa Delgado stood from her table, concern evident in her voice. "What does it say?" Briggs didn't respond immediately. He was staring at the tag like it contained the secrets of the universe, like everything he thought he knew had just been rewritten in an instant. Finally, he read aloud, "Odin, K97734, Handler, Ghost Mother, Operation Silent Leash, KIA 2019. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, "KIA, Derek said, his voice cracking. "Killed in action, but she's right there. She's alive." "Am I?" Claire's voice cut through the shock like a blade. She had moved while everyone was focused on the tag, positioning herself with her back to the wall, Odin at her side. Her posture had changed. The meek, submissive waitress was gone, replaced by something harder, something colder, something that looked exactly like what Holloway had described. "Ma'am," Tran started, but Claire cut him off with a look. "Don't." The word was flat, final. "Don't call me that. Don't call me anything. I'm not who he says I am. I'm not anyone. I'm a waitress who serves drinks and minds her own business, and that's all I've ever been. And that's all I'm ever going to be." "Claire," Pete's voice was gentle. "No, Pete." She turned to him, and for the first time, emotion flickered across her face, something raw and painful and old. "You don't understand. None of you understand. I have to be nobody. I have to be invisible, because if I'm not—" She stopped. Outside, an engine rumbled. Headlights swept across the bar's windows as a military transport truck pulled into the parking lot. Corey Dunn was already on his feet, moving toward the window. That's one of ours, from the K9 unit. He turned back to the group, a strange smile on his face. I called for backup earlier, asked them to bring Havoc. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. You did what? Tran's voice was sharp. I wanted to scare her a little, show her what real military dogs are like. Havoc's the most aggressive dog on base. Can't even get near him without protective gear. Corey shrugged. Thought it'd be funny. You thought it'd be funny. Rosa Delgado rose from her seat, her face a mask of controlled fury. You brought the most dangerous animal on a military installation into a civilian establishment as a joke? Relax, Gunny. He's in a cage. It's fine. The bar door opened again. 2 handlers entered, both wearing the heavy bite sleeves and protective gear required for handling high-risk canines. Between them, secured by double leads and a muzzle, walked the largest German Shepherd anyone in the room had ever seen. Havoc was midnight black, 98 pounds of muscle and fury. Even muzzled and restrained, his presence commanded attention. His eyes swept the room with predatory intelligence, cataloging threats, marking targets. Then he saw Claire, and something extraordinary happened. The growling stopped. The straining against the leads stopped. Every ounce of aggression drained from the animal's body as if someone had flipped a switch. Havoc sat. His tail, which according to base records had never wagged for anyone, began to move. Slowly at first, then faster, sweeping back and forth across the floor. A sound emerged from his throat, not a growl, a whine, high-pitched and desperate and achingly familiar. The handlers stared at their charge in disbelief. What the hell? One of them muttered. He's never done this. Ever. Claire hadn't moved, but her eyes had changed. Where before there had been carefully constructed blankness, now there was something else. Recognition, memory, pain. Hello, boy, she said softly. The words seemed to cost her something. It's been a long time, hasn't it? Havoc strained toward her, not with aggression, but with desperate, overwhelming need. The handler struggled to hold him back, and for a moment it looked like he might break free entirely. Ma'am, one of the handlers called out, panic in his voice. Please step back. He's unpredictable. He might... Release him. The command came from Commander Briggs. His voice left no room for argument. Sir, with all due respect, this animal has attacked multiple handlers. He's scheduled for behavioral evaluation next week. We can't just... I said release him. The handlers exchanged looks. Then slowly, they unclipped the leads. Havoc shot across the bar like a missile, 98 pounds of German Shepherd, moving at full speed toward a woman half his weight. Several people screamed. Megan Ashford dove behind a table. Bryson Holt actually ran for the door, but Claire just stood there, and when Havoc reached her, he didn't attack, he didn't bite. He threw himself at her feet, rolled onto his back, and presented his belly with a whimper of pure, unadulterated joy. Claire knelt beside him, her hands moving to the familiar spots behind his ears, along his jawline, under his chin. Her fingers found the places they had known 6 years ago, when he was a 4-month-old puppy with too much energy and not enough discipline. I know, she murmured, her voice cracking. I know, sweetheart. I missed you too. Holy... Derek couldn't finish the sentence. Corey Dunn had pressed himself against the wall, his phone hanging forgotten at his side. This wasn't what he had planned. This wasn't what was supposed to happen. The dog was supposed to terrify her, not transform into a lovesick puppy at her feet. That's not possible, Megan whispered, still half hidden behind her table. He bit 3 handlers last month alone. He put one of them in the hospital. Because they weren't his handler. Holloway's voice was steady now, filled with a quiet certainty. They weren't her. Dogs remember, Lieutenant. Military working dogs especially. They remember the people who loved them, the people who trained them, the people who... His voice caught. The people who they thought they lost. Claire was crying. She hadn't cried in 6 years. Had trained herself not to, had built walls so high and thick that nothing could penetrate them. But here, now, with Havoc's warm body pressed against her legs and his tail drumming against the floor, those walls were crumbling. I'm sorry, she whispered, her face buried in the dog's fur. I'm so sorry I left you. I'm so sorry I couldn't come back. The bar was silent, except for the thump of Havoc's tail and Claire's quiet sobs. Commander Briggs walked slowly toward them, his footsteps measured and deliberate. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see the tear tracks on Claire's face, far enough to give her space. Master Chief Caldwell, he said quietly. Claire looked up. Her mask was gone. In its place was something broken and beautiful and fierce. That's not my name anymore. With all due respect, ma'am, I don't think names change who we are. Briggs gestured toward Havoc. He certainly doesn't seem to think so. A laugh escaped Claire, wet and painful. Havoc was always too smart for his own good. Stubborn too, like someone else I knew. She scratched behind the dog's ears, earning a contented groan. I trained him when he was just a puppy, 4 months old. He was the worst student I ever had. Wouldn't listen, wouldn't follow commands, wouldn't do anything unless he decided it was worth his time. Sounds about right, one of the handlers muttered. But he was loyal. Claire's voice softened. Once he decided you were his person, that was it. Nothing could change his mind. Nothing could make him give up on you. She looked down at the dog, who was gazing up at her with naked adoration. I taught him a command, a secret one, something that only worked if you truly loved him, something that required trust. She leaned down, placed her forehead against Havoc's, and spoke a single phrase, Oscar Mike 7. The effect was instantaneous. Havoc's entire body went from relaxed to alert in a heartbeat. He rose to his feet, positioned himself at Claire's left side, and sat with perfect military precision. His eyes were forward. His body was still. He was, in that moment, the perfect military working dog. Mother of... Derek couldn't finish the sentence. That command, Tran said slowly, I've never heard that command. It's not in any manual. It's not taught at any school. No. Claire rose to her feet, Havoc maintaining his position beside her. It's not. Because I created it. It's part of a system I developed for the Phantom Pack program, a way to establish absolute trust between handler and dog. She met Tran's eyes. A way to create bonds that couldn't be broken, not by distance, not by time, not even by death. The Phantom Pack. Holloway stepped forward, his earlier shock replaced by something approaching reverence. The 50 dogs. The extraction point. Operation Silent Leash. Claire's jaw tightened. That's classified, Master Sergeant. Ma'am, with all due respect, you're standing in a bar full of people who just watched you perform a classified command that supposedly doesn't exist. I think we're a little past classified at this point. For a long moment, Claire said nothing. Then she laughed again, this time with genuine humor. You always did have a smart mouth, Frank. Holloway blinked. Then a smile broke across his weathered face. You remember. I remember everything. Claire's expression softened. I remember every handler I ever trained, every dog I ever worked with, every mission, every success, every failure. The smile faded. Every name on every wall. The silence stretched. Then Commander Briggs spoke. What happened at Kandahar, Master Chief? What really happened during Operation Silent Leash? Claire closed her eyes. For a moment, she was somewhere else, somewhere sandy and hot, and filled with the sounds of gunfire and screaming and the desperate barking of 50 dogs who refused to give up, who refused to leave, who held their position for 14 hours against impossible odds because that was what she had taught them to do. We were supposed to extract a high-value target, she said quietly, a defector with information about enemy supply lines. The mission was supposed to be quick, in and out, 12 hours maximum. She opened her eyes. But we walked into an ambush. Someone had leaked our position. The enemy was waiting for us. How many? Briggs asked. 347 combatants. We confirmed the count afterward. Claire's voice was flat, reciting facts like entries in a report. Our team was 12 operators and 50 dogs. 50 dogs against 347 combatants, Megan whispered. That's insane. That's what they told us too. Command said to fall back, said the mission was compromised, said to leave the target and evacuate immediately. Claire's hand dropped to Havoc's head, her fingers threading through his fur. But the target wasn't just information. He was a person, a father. He had a wife and 3 children waiting for him in Virginia Beach, just 20 miles from here. And if we left him, they would have found him. They would have killed him, slowly. So you stayed, Holloway said. It wasn't a question. So we stayed. We held the extraction point for 14 hours while waiting for backup. 14 hours of constant combat. 14 hours of watching my dogs fall one by one, holding the line so their handlers could escape. Claire's voice cracked. 50 dogs went in, 43 came out, 7 died protecting us, protecting me. She looked at Havoc. He was one of the puppies I had trained for the next generation. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't even certified yet. But when things went bad, he showed up anyway. Fought like he'd been doing it his whole life. And you, Briggs pressed gently, what happened to you? Claire was silent for a long moment. Then she reached for the collar of her shirt. Ma'am, you don't have to, Tran started, but Claire was already pulling the fabric aside, revealing her left shoulder. The entire bar sucked in a collective breath. The scar tissue covered most of her shoulder and extended down her back, visible even in the dim light of the bar. It was the kind of scarring that came from an IED blast, from fire and shrapnel and the kind of heat that melted metal. I was supposed to die, Claire said simply. The blast threw me 40 feet, severed my main artery, third-degree burns over 60% of my body. The medics who found me said I should have been dead 3 times over. But you survived, Pete said quietly. It was the first time he had spoken since Holloway's revelation. I survived. Claire let her shirt fall back into place. And then I was told that I couldn't go back, that my identity had been compromised, that if anyone knew I was alive, everyone I had ever worked with would be in danger. The defector, his family, my handlers, everyone. So they erased you, Briggs said. They killed Ghost Mother and created Claire Donovan. Something like that. Claire's smile was bitter. The funeral was beautiful, I'm told. Full military honors, 21-gun salute, the works. She looked at Holloway. You were there, you saw it. I wept, Holloway admitted, his voice rough. We all did. You were the best of us, ma'am, the absolute best. No, Claire shook her head. I was just a woman who loved dogs, who understood that the bond between a handler and their partner was the most powerful weapon in our arsenal. Not firepower, not technology, trust, loyalty, love. She looked around the bar, at the faces staring back at her with varying degrees of shock and awe and shame. That's what I taught. That's what the Phantom Pack was built on. And that's what kept 50 dogs at that extraction point for 14 hours, when anyone with sense would have run. Her eyes found the corner booth, where the handlers who had mocked her were now sitting in stunned silence. You asked what I know about military working dogs, she said, her voice soft, but carrying in the absolute quiet of the bar. I know everything, because I created the program that trained you. I wrote the manual you studied. I established every protocol, every command, every technique that you're so proud of mastering. Derek Sloan looked like he was about to be sick. Megan Ashford had tears streaming down her face. And Bryson Holt, the man who had grabbed her chin and called her stupid, had sunk so low in his seat that he was practically under the table. The dogs you work with, Claire continued, are my children. Every single one of them carries something I taught, something I passed down. And when you disrespect a handler, any handler, you disrespect everything those dogs stand for, everything those dogs have sacrificed. She pointed to the photograph on the wall, the one no one ever noticed, the 50 dogs in formation around the extraction point. Those are my children too, the ones who died so that mission could succeed, the ones whose names are engraved on memorials that most people will never see. They deserve better than handlers who think being good at their job makes them superior to everyone else. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, Commander Briggs lowered himself to one knee. The movement was formal, deliberate, the kind of gesture that carried weight. Master Chief Caldwell, he said, his voice ringing through the bar. On behalf of Naval Special Warfare and the United States Navy, I apologize. For whatever failures led to your death being the only option, for whatever circumstances forced you to give up everything you worked for, and for the behavior of these personnel tonight, which has been unbecoming of the uniforms they wear. Claire stared at him. Commander, please get up. That's not necessary. With all due respect, ma'am, I disagree. Briggs rose, but his bearing remained formal. What you did at Kandahar saved lives. What you built changed everything about how we work with military animals. And the fact that you've been standing behind a bar for 5 years, serving drinks to people who aren't fit to polish your boots, is a tragedy. He turned to the corner booth. Specialist Dunn, Petty Officer Holt, Lieutenant Ashford, Petty Officer Sloan. His voice had gone cold. Outside, now. They moved without argument, filing past Claire with their heads down, unable to meet her eyes. Senior Chief Tron was the last to go. He stopped in front of Claire, swallowed hard, and then did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He snapped to attention and saluted. "Ma'am," he said, voice rough, "I had no idea. The things we said, the way we acted, it was inexcusable. I'm sorry." Claire looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly she returned the salute. "You didn't know, Senior Chief. None of you did. That was the point." She lowered her hand. "Go take care of your people. They're going to need leadership tonight, not punishment." Tran nodded once, sharply, and followed the others out the door. The bar felt empty now, though there were still plenty of people present. Rosa Delgado and Ethan Park at their table by the window, Pete behind the bar. The regulars who had witnessed everything but said nothing, and in the far corner, Commander Briggs, still standing at attention, and Claire. Claire, who was suddenly not a waitress anymore, not a nobody, not invisible. Claire, who was Ghost Mother, the legend, the myth, the woman who had trained 50 dogs to do the impossible and then been erased from existence for her troubles. Havoc pressed against her leg, his tail still wagging, his eyes still bright with recognition and love. "What happens now?" Pete asked quietly. Claire looked at him, then at Briggs, then at the door, where Senior Chief Tron and the others were loading into vehicles, their careers and their certainties in shambles. "Now," she said, "I suppose I have to decide whether Ghost Mother stays dead or not." Briggs stepped forward. "Ma'am, if I may, I have a phone call I need to make. There are people who need to know you're alive, people who can help." "Help with what, Commander?" "With whatever you decide to do next." He pulled out his phone. "Because whatever that decision is, you shouldn't have to make it alone." Claire was silent for a long moment. Then, "Make your call, Commander. But there's something you should know first." "What's that, ma'am?" Claire looked at the photograph on the wall, the 50 dogs, the extraction point, the mission that had cost her everything. "I didn't come here to hide," she said quietly. "I came here because this is where they brought my dogs. The survivors of Operation Silent Leash. The ones who were too old or too damaged to be redeployed. They were shipped to Virginia Beach for decommissioning." Her voice broke on the last word. "I couldn't save them from the war, but I could save them from that. So I found this job. I found this bar. And every night after closing, I go to the base. I visit them. I make sure they know they haven't been forgotten." "The base knows about this?" Briggs asked, surprised. "One person knows." Claire's eyes found someone behind the bar. "Dr. Cross, the base veterinarian. She's been letting me in through the service entrance for years." As if summoned by her name, the door opened and a woman in civilian clothes entered. She was in her early 40s with short gray hair and kind eyes, and she carried herself with the quiet competence of someone who had spent her life caring for others. Dr. Vivian Cross stopped just inside the door, taking in the scene with a single glance. Claire in the center of the room, surrounded by people who had clearly just learned her secret, Havoc at her feet, tail still wagging, Commander Briggs standing at attention. "Well," she said calmly, "I suppose the secret's out." Claire laughed, a sound that was half sob. "You could say that." Vivian walked to the bar, poured herself a drink from one of the bottles Pete kept for special occasions, and took a long swallow. "I've been waiting for this day," she admitted. 5 years of watching you sneak onto the base. 5 years of watching you spend your nights with dogs that everyone else has forgotten. 5 years of knowing who you really are and not being able to tell a soul." She set the glass down. "It's been exhausting, honestly." "You knew?" Briggs demanded. "You knew she was alive this whole time?" "I suspected," Vivian shrugged. "The dogs confirmed it. Animals don't lie, Commander." When every single survivor of Operation Silent Leash reacted the same way to a random waitress from a nearby bar, it wasn't hard to put the pieces together. "And you didn't report it?" "Report what? That a dead woman was visiting dogs?" Vivian's smile was thin. "I may be military, Commander, but I'm also a doctor. My first obligation is to my patients. And those dogs needed her. They were dying without her." Claire closed her eyes. "They were?" Depression, failure to thrive, refusal to eat, all the classic signs of a bonded animal that has lost their person. Vivian's voice softened. "When you started coming, when they realized you were alive, everything changed. Their numbers improved. Their energy came back. 3 dogs that were scheduled for euthanasia are still alive today because of your visits." "Coda," Claire whispered. "Phantom. Whisper." "Yes," Vivian nodded. Your children, as you call them, the last 3 survivors of the 50. The weight of those words settled over the room. 50 dogs had gone into Kandahar. 7 had died in combat. The rest had been scattered across bases and programs. Some retrained, some retired, some lost to age and injury and the slow grinding aftermath of war. And now, only 3 remained. Only 3 remembered what it had been like to hold that line, to fight that fight, to refuse to give up, even when every instinct screamed retreat. "I need to see them," Claire said. Her voice had changed again, harder now, more certain. "Not tonight, not in secret, not in... I need to see them properly, in daylight, as who I really am." Briggs nodded. "That can be arranged. I'll make some calls." "There's something else." Claire turned to Pete. "The call you mentioned earlier, the one about people who can help." She took a breath. "I think I'm ready to talk to them, whoever they are." Pete's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Something that might have been relief, or maybe sadness, or maybe both. "Are you sure, Claire? Once that door opens, it doesn't close again." "I know." She looked around the bar, at the photographs on the walls, at the memories preserved in wood and glass and fading color. "But I'm tired of being dead, Pete. I'm tired of watching from the shadows. And I'm tired of pretending that the best years of my life never happened." She knelt beside Havoc, burying her face in his fur one more time. "I'm tired of my children not knowing their mother is alive." Pete nodded slowly. Then he reached beneath the bar and pulled out a phone. Not the regular one he used for business calls, a different one, older, with a single number programmed into it. "I've had this since the day you walked through my door," he said quietly. "They gave it to me, told me to call if anything ever changed, if you ever decided you were ready to come back." "They?" Briggs asked sharply. "Who are they?" Pete looked at Claire. She nodded. "Admiral Stern," Pete said. "The man who signed the order to erase Ghost Mother from existence. The man who's been waiting 6 years for her to decide she wants to exist again." He held out the phone. Claire took it. Her hands were steady now, her breathing even. Whatever was coming, she was ready to face it. She pressed the single number and held the phone to her ear. It rang once, twice. Then a voice she hadn't heard in 6 years answered. "This is Stern." Claire closed her eyes. "Admiral," she said, "it's me. It's Ghost Mother." A long pause. Then, "Welcome back to the living, Master Chief. We have a lot to discuss." The line went dead. Claire lowered the phone. Outside, the Virginia Beach night was dark and quiet, broken only by the distant sound of waves and the occasional bark from the canine facility half a mile away. But inside the kennel house, surrounded by people who had just learned her secret, standing beside a dog who had never forgotten her, Ghost Mother began to breathe again. For the first time in 6 years, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt alive. The door opened one more time. A woman in military dress uniform stepped through, her insignia marking her as a lieutenant commander. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who dealt in secrets for a living, her eyes sweeping the room with the kind of assessment that missed nothing. "Master Chief Caldwell," she said crisply. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Amy Russo, Military Intelligence. Admiral Stern asked me to debrief you personally." Claire straightened. Old habits, buried but not forgotten, reasserted themselves. Her posture shifted. Her expression hardened. The waitress vanished completely, replaced by the woman who had trained 50 dogs to hold an impossible line. "Lieutenant Commander," she acknowledged, "I assume this isn't a social visit." "No, ma'am." Russo's gaze was steady. "The Admiral has information you need to hear. Information about why you were erased, and information about why that may no longer be enough to keep you safe." The temperature in the room dropped. "Explain." Russo glanced at the civilians in the bar, at Commander Briggs, at the others who had witnessed the evening's revelations. "Perhaps somewhere more private, ma'am?" "No." Claire's voice was firm. "These people just watched my cover get blown. They deserve to know what happens next. All of them." Russo hesitated. Then, "Very well, ma'am." She reached into her briefcase and withdrew a tablet. 6 years ago, Operation Silent Leash was compromised by an internal leak. Someone inside our own command structure sold our position to the enemy. That's why you walked into an ambush. That's why 7 of your dogs died. That's why you had to be erased. I know all this. What you don't know," Russo continued, "is that we never found the leak. We looked for years, turned over every stone, investigated everyone who knew about the operation, and we came up empty. Claire's blood went cold. You're telling me the person who got my dogs killed is still out there? I'm telling you more than that, ma'am. Russo's face was grim. I'm telling you that 2 weeks ago, we intercepted communications suggesting the leak has resurfaced, and they're looking for you. For me? But I'm dead. Yes, ma'am, and someone is very interested in confirming that. Russo pulled up an image on the tablet, a surveillance photo, grainy but clear enough to make out features. Do you recognize this man? Claire looked at the image, and her heart stopped. The man in the photograph was in his late 30s, dark-haired, with a scar running down the left side of his face. He was walking through what appeared to be an airport terminal, his movements casual, but his eyes scanning constantly. No, Claire whispered. That's not possible. Ma'am? That's Sergeant Marcus Kane. Claire's voice was barely audible. Call sign, Talon. He was one of my handlers, one of the best I ever trained. He died at Kandahar. I saw him fall. You saw what you were meant to see, ma'am. Russo's voice was gentle but firm. Sergeant Kane didn't die at Kandahar. He was extracted by an unknown party approximately 20 minutes before the final assault. He's been off the grid ever since. Claire's legs gave out. Pete caught her before she hit the floor, lowering her into a chair while Havoc pressed against her legs, whining with concern. He's alive, Claire breathed. Talon is alive. Yes, ma'am. And based on our intelligence, he's been working for the people who sold out your mission. Russo paused. The people who wanted you dead. The implications hit Claire like a physical blow. Marcus Kane, the handler she had trained from a green recruit into one of the finest canine specialists in the military. The man who had fought beside her at Kandahar, who had held the line when everyone else was falling, who had supposedly given his life so that others could escape. That man was a traitor. That man had been working against her all along, and now he was looking for her. Commander Briggs, Claire said, her voice steadier than it had any right to be. I believe I'm going to need that help you mentioned. Briggs nodded grimly. You'll have it, ma'am. Whatever you need. Claire looked at Russo. The Admiral said we have a lot to discuss. I think it's time we got started. Russo inclined her head. The car is outside, ma'am. Whenever you're ready. Claire stood. She looked around the kennel house one last time, at the bar where she had spent 5 years hiding, at the photographs on the walls that told stories of heroes and dogs and sacrifices most people would never understand. Then she looked at Pete. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything. Pete's eyes were wet. You come back, you hear me? This bar isn't the same without you. Claire smiled. I'll come back, I promise. She turned to Havoc. Come on, boy. We've got work to do. The dog rose to his feet, positioning himself at her left side with the same precision he had displayed 6 years ago when they had walked into Kandahar together. Ghost Mother and her dog, walking into the unknown, one more time. Outside, the night was waiting. And somewhere in the darkness, a man named Talon was watching, waiting, planning, because Ghost Mother was supposed to be dead, and some ghosts needed to stay buried. Claire stepped through the door, Havoc at her side, and disappeared into the Virginia Beach night. Behind her, the kennel house slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed, drinks were poured, the jukebox kicked back up with an old country song about soldiers coming home. But something had changed. Everyone who had been there that night knew it. They had witnessed the resurrection of a legend, and legends, once risen, don't stay quiet for long. Rosa Delgado raised her glass. To Ghost Mother, she said quietly, wherever the night takes her. Around the bar, others joined in. Veterans and active duty, and civilians who had never served but understood what they had just witnessed. To Ghost Mother. The toast echoed through the room, and somewhere, in the darkness outside, a dog barked. One bark, sharp and clear and full of purpose. The sound of a warrior answering a call. The sound of loyalty that time could not break. The sound of a bond that death itself had failed to sever. Ghost Mother was alive, and her children were waiting. The military sedan cut through the Virginia Beach night like a blade through silk, its headlights carving tunnels of light through the darkness. Claire sat in the back seat, Havoc pressed against her leg, his warmth a constant reminder that she wasn't dreaming, that this was real, that the life she had built over 5 years was crumbling around her like sandcastles before the tide. Lieutenant Commander Russo drove with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Commander Briggs sat in the passenger seat, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low tones to someone whose voice Claire couldn't quite make out. "Yes, sir. Confirmed. She's with us now." A pause. "No, sir. She appears to be in good health, mentally sharp, physically capable." Another pause, longer this time. "I understand, sir. We'll be there in 20 minutes. He ended the call and turned to look at Claire over his shoulder. "Admiral Stern is waiting at the base. He's cleared a secure conference room for the debrief." Claire nodded, but said nothing. Her hand continued its rhythmic stroking of Havoc's fur, a motion that had become so automatic over the years that she barely noticed she was doing it anymore. "Ma'am," Russo said, her eyes meeting Claire's in the rearview mirror, "I know this is a lot to process, but I need you to understand something before we arrive." "Go ahead." "The intelligence about Talon, about Sergeant Kane, it's fresh. We only confirmed his survival 72 hours ago. Before that, everyone believed what you believed, that he died at Kandahar, that he was a hero." Claire's jaw tightened. "He was a hero, or at least I thought he was. He saved 3 handlers during the initial assault, dragged them to cover under enemy fire. I recommended him for a Bronze Star." "The recommendation was approved," Russo said quietly, posthumously. "His mother received it at the memorial service." The irony of it sat heavy in the car, a weight that none of them could lift. A traitor, honored as a hero erased as a ghost. The world had a sick sense of humor sometimes. "What does he want?" Claire asked finally. "Talon, Kane, whatever he calls himself now. Why is he looking for me after 6 years?" Russo exchanged a glance with Briggs. "We don't know for certain," Briggs admitted, "but our analysts have a theory." "Which is?" "You're the only one who can identify him." Briggs turned fully in his seat to face her. "Think about it, ma'am. Everyone else who knew Kane personally, who worked with him closely, they either died at Kandahar or they've been reassigned to positions where they'd never encounter him. You're the only survivor with both the knowledge and the clearance to expose him. And as long as you were dead," Russo added, "he was safe. But now someone talked." Claire's voice was flat. "Someone at the kennel house tonight. Someone who couldn't keep their mouth shut." "We're monitoring all communications from the personnel involved," Russo assured her. "If any of them leak your survival, we'll know immediately." "That's not good enough." Claire leaned forward, her eyes hard. "Those handlers, the ones who harassed me tonight, they're not bad people. Arrogant, yes. Foolish, certainly. But they're not traitors. They don't deserve to be caught in whatever crossfire is coming." Briggs nodded slowly. "Agreed, which is why they're being detained at the base until we can assess the threat level, for their own protection." "Detained," Claire laughed, a sound without humor. "I'm sure they love that. They'll understand once they've been briefed. And if they don't," Briggs shrugged, "then they'll understand when the courts-martial are finished." The rest of the drive passed in silence. 20 minutes later, the sedan pulled through the gates of Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek, the guards waving them through after a cursory check of Russo's credentials. The base was quiet at this hour, most personnel either sleeping or on deployment, and the streets were empty except for the occasional patrol vehicle. They parked outside a nondescript building that Claire recognized immediately. Building 7. Intelligence. The place where secrets went to be analyzed, categorized, and occasionally buried. She had been inside this building exactly once before, 6 years ago, when Admiral Stern had sat her down and explained why she had to die. Now she was back. And the Admiral was waiting. He looked older than she remembered. The hair that had been salt and pepper was now fully silver, and the lines around his eyes had deepened into permanent grooves. But his posture was still perfect, his uniform still immaculate, and his gaze still carried the weight of someone who had sent men and women to their deaths and learned to live with the consequences. "Master Chief Caldwell." He rose from behind the conference table as she entered, Havoc at her side. "It's good to see you alive." "Admiral?" Claire didn't salute. She wasn't sure she had the right anymore. "I wish I could say the same about the circumstances." Stern's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Always direct. I always appreciated that about you." He gestured to a chair across the table from him. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." Claire sat. Havoc positioned himself at her feet, his eyes never leaving the Admiral. "I assume Russo briefed you on the Kane situation. She gave me the highlights. Traitor, alive, looking for me." Claire's voice was clipped. "What she didn't tell me is why. Why did he do it? What could possibly have been worth betraying everything we stood for?" Stern was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into a folder on the table and withdrew a photograph. "Do you recognize this man?" Claire looked at the image, a middle-aged man in civilian clothes, photographed from a distance. There was something familiar about him, something that tugged at the edges of her memory, but she couldn't place it. "Should I?" "His name is Viktor Petrov, Russian intelligence. Specifically, he runs a program dedicated to acquiring military working dog training methodologies from Western nations." Stern's voice was carefully neutral. "Your methodologies, Master Chief? The Phantom Pack protocols?" Claire's blood went cold. "They wanted my dogs. They wanted more than that. They wanted you." Stern leaned forward. "The Phantom Pack program wasn't just effective, it was revolutionary. The bond you created between handlers and dogs, the loyalty protocols, the trust commands, nothing like it existed anywhere else in the world. Russia, China, Iran, they all tried to replicate it. They all failed, because they didn't understand." Claire's voice was soft. "They thought it was about training, about conditioning, about breaking down the animal and rebuilding it to serve. And it wasn't? No." She looked at Havoc, who was watching her with those ancient, knowing eyes. "It was about love, about genuine connection, about treating the dog as a partner, not a tool. You can't fake that. You can't train it into existence. It has to be real. Which is why they needed you." Stern's voice hardened. "Kane was recruited 3 years before Kandahar. He was supposed to deliver you alive. The ambush wasn't meant to kill you. It was meant to capture you." Claire stared at him. "Capture me?" "The extraction point was designed to be a bottleneck, a killing ground that would force your team into a defensive position while enemy forces closed in from all sides. But the plan was never to wipe you out. It was to overwhelm you, take you prisoner, and ship you to a black site where you could be persuaded to share your methods." "Persuaded?" Claire's voice was ice. "You mean tortured?" "Yes." The word hung in the air between them. "But the plan failed," Stern continued, "because of you. Because of those 50 dogs. You held that extraction point for 14 hours against 347 combatants. You killed or wounded over 200 of them. By the time reinforcements arrived, the enemy had given up trying to take you alive and was simply trying to survive." "7 of my dogs died," Claire whispered. 7. "And 43 lived, along with every handler and the defector you were sent to extract." Stern's voice softened slightly. "What you did that day was impossible, Master Chief. The analysts still can't explain it. You shouldn't have survived. None of you should have survived. My dogs didn't give up." Claire's hand found Havoc's head again. "They held the line because that's what I taught them to do, because they trusted me, because they loved me." Her voice cracked. "And 7 of them died because of that love." "7 of them died as heroes," Stern corrected gently. "As did you in the official record. Your death at Kandahar accomplished 2 things. It convinced our enemies that you were beyond their reach, and it convinced Kane that his mission had succeeded. But he survived. Yes, he disappeared during the confusion of the final assault. We assumed he was killed. His body was never recovered, but with the chaos of that day, with the number of casualties," Stern shrugged. "It wasn't unusual for remains to go missing. So he's been out there for 6 years, working for the Russians, and you only found out 72 hours ago. He's been careful, very careful. He knows our methods, our surveillance capabilities, our blind spots. He was trained by the best, after all." Stern's eyes met hers. "By you." Claire closed her eyes. She had trained Marcus Kane, had taught him everything she knew about dogs, about loyalty, about the bond between handler and partner. She had watched him grow from a nervous recruit into a confident, capable specialist. And all along, he had been planning to betray her. "What do you want from me, Admiral?" Stern leaned back in his chair. "I want you to come back." Claire's eyes snapped open. "Come back? The Phantom Pack program has been struggling since your death. Your successors are capable, but they lack your instinct, your connection with the animals. The dogs know the difference." He paused. "We need you, Master Chief. The program needs you. And frankly, with Kane out there, with the threat he represents, hiding isn't going to keep you safe anymore." Claire was silent for a long moment. Then, "I have conditions." "Name them." "First, the handlers from tonight. Holt, Ashford, Sloan, all of them. They face disciplinary action for their behavior, but nothing that destroys their careers. They were arrogant, not criminal." Stern nodded. "Agreed. What else? Second, the survivors of Operation Silent Leash, the dogs. Coda, Phantom, Whisper, they're scheduled for decommissioning. That ends now. They live out their days in comfort, with proper care, and I have unlimited access to visit them. Done. Third, Claire's voice hardened. I want Kane. When we find him, and we will find him, I want to be there. I want to look him in the eye and ask him why. Why he betrayed us. Why he sold out his brothers and sisters in arms. Why he let 7 dogs die for nothing. Stern studied her for a long moment. That might not be possible. If Kane is captured, he'll likely be turned over to intelligence services for interrogation. There are protocols. I don't care about protocols. Claire stood, and Havoc rose with her, positioning himself at her side like he had 1,000 times before. You want Ghost Mother back? These are my terms. All of them. Non-negotiable. The Admiral was silent. Then, slowly he smiled. You haven't changed at all, have you? I've changed plenty, but not the parts that matter. Stern rose from his chair and extended his hand. Welcome back to the living, Master Chief Caldwell. I'll have the paperwork started immediately. Claire took his hand. The grip was firm, professional. But there was warmth in it too, the warmth of someone who had carried the weight of her death for 6 years and was finally able to set it down. There's one more thing, Claire said as she released his hand. Yes? I want to see them. Coda, Phantom, and Whisper. Tonight. Stern checked his watch. It's almost 300 hours. They don't sleep well anymore. Neither do I. Claire's voice softened. Please, Admiral, it's been too long. He studied her face for a moment, seeing something there that made his expression gentle. I'll have someone escort you to the kennel facility. Take as long as you need. Claire nodded once, sharply. Then she turned and walked out of the conference room, Havoc at her heels, leaving Admiral Stern alone with the weight of secrets and the ghost of a woman who had finally decided to live again. The kennel facility was quiet at this hour. The only sounds the soft breathing of sleeping dogs and the hum of climate control systems, keeping the temperature comfortable. A young specialist, barely awake, had let Claire in with wide eyes and trembling hands, clearly having been briefed on exactly who she was and what her visit meant. Claire walked down the row of kennels slowly, her footsteps barely audible on the concrete floor. Most of the dogs were asleep, curled in their beds or stretched out on cooling mats. A few raised their heads as she passed, sniffing the air, but none of them reacted with the recognition she was looking for. These weren't herdeds. These were the next generation, trained by handlers who had learned from her methods without ever knowing her name. But at the end of the row, in a separate section marked Retirement, 3 kennels held animals that were different, older, grayer, scarred in ways that told stories of battles fought and survived. Claire stopped in front of the first kennel. Inside, a German shepherd with a missing front leg lay on a thick orthopedic bed, his breathing slow and even. His muzzle was almost entirely white, and his eyes, when they opened, were clouded with age. But when he saw Claire, those eyes cleared. "Coda," she whispered. The dog's tail began to move. Slowly at first, hampered by arthritis and age, but with increasing enthusiasm. He tried to rise, struggled, and Claire quickly entered the kennel, kneeling beside him before he could hurt himself. "Easy, boy. Easy. I'm here. I'm right here." Coda's nose pressed against her neck, sniffing, confirming. A sound emerged from his throat, something between a whine and a howl, the sound of a dog who had waited 6 years for this moment and couldn't believe it had finally arrived. Claire held him, her tears soaking into his fur, her heart breaking and healing all at once. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't come sooner. I'm so sorry you had to wait." In the next kennel, another dog had woken. This one was a Belgian Malinois like Odin, smaller and leaner, with scars crisscrossing her flanks like a road map of violence. Phantom had been the fastest of the 50, able to cover ground at speeds that seemed impossible for a dog her size. Now she moved slowly, carefully, her joints protesting every step. But she moved, pressing against the bars of her kennel, trying to get closer to the woman she remembered. Claire reached through, let Phantom lick her fingers, felt the rough tongue, and the desperate affection behind it. "I know, sweetheart. I know." The third kennel held Whisper, a Dutch shepherd who had earned her name by being almost completely silent in the field. She had been the scout, the one who could move through enemy territory without making a sound, the one who had saved countless lives by detecting ambushes before they could be sprung. She was awake too now, watching Claire with eyes that held the intelligence that age had not dimmed. Claire opened each kennel in turn, letting the dogs out, letting them surround her as she sat on the cold concrete floor. Havoc joined them, and for a moment, in the dim light of the retirement section, it was like Kandahar had never happened, like they were all still young, still strong, still ready to take on the world. "I'm coming back," Claire told them, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I'm not leaving again. Whatever happens, whatever comes next, I'm staying with you, all of you, until the end." The dogs pressed closer, their warmth surrounding her, their love unconditional and absolute. This was what she had taught them. This was what the Phantom Pack was built on. Not obedience, not discipline, not fear, love. And love, unlike everything else in this world, did not fade with time. 3 hours later, as the first light of dawn began to paint the Virginia Beach sky in shades of pink and gold, Claire emerged from the kennel facility. She was tired, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical, but there was something different in her eyes now. Purpose. She had spent 6 years hiding, 6 years pretending to be someone else, 6 years watching from the shadows while the world moved on without her. That ended today. Commander Briggs was waiting by the entrance, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. "Thought you might need this." Claire took one gratefully, inhaling the steam before taking a long swallow. "Thank you." "The Admiral filled me in on your conditions." Briggs fell into step beside her as she walked toward the base's main administrative building. "For what it's worth, I think they're more than fair." "They're not fair at all," Claire replied. "Fair would be those 7 dogs still being alive. Fair would be me never having to hide in the first place. But fair isn't something the universe specializes in." "No," Briggs agreed. "It isn't." They walked in silence for a moment. Then, "The handlers from last night. They're being held in Building 12, awaiting disciplinary review." Briggs paused. "Some of them have been asking to speak with you." Claire stopped walking. "Which ones?" "Sloan, Ashford, Tran, though technically he wasn't involved in the harassment." Briggs hesitated. "Holt and Dunn haven't said a word since they were brought in. Different reasons, I think. Holt seems to be in shock. Dunn seems to be calculating his legal options. And the others? They want to apologize, properly this time, not because they've been ordered to, but because they understand what they did." Claire considered this. "Let me talk to them." "All of them?" "The ones who want to talk, the ones who are ready to listen." She resumed walking, Havoc padding along beside her. Part of being a trainer is knowing when someone is capable of learning, and part of being a leader is giving them the chance. Building 12 was a nondescript structure that served as temporary holding for personnel awaiting administrative action. Not a brig exactly, but not comfortable either. The handlers from the night before were being held in separate rooms, monitored but not restrained, their careers hanging in the balance. Claire entered the first room alone. Derek Sloan sat at a metal table, his wire-rimmed glasses slightly askew, his face pale and drawn. When he saw Claire, he immediately rose to his feet, his posture snapping to something approaching attention. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything yet." Claire took the seat across from him, her movements calm and unhurried. "Sit down, petty officer. Let's talk." Sloan sat, his hands fidgeting on the table. "I've spent the last 6 hours going over everything I said last night," he began, the words tumbling out. "Every stupid, arrogant thing that came out of my mouth. And I keep thinking, what if I had just listened? What if I had paid attention to the signs instead of being so certain I knew everything?" "What signs?" Claire asked quietly. "The way you moved, the way you corrected my terminology without even thinking about it, the way that dog, Havoc, the dog that has literally sent 3 handlers to the hospital, the way he just stopped for you." Sloan shook his head. "I was so busy showing off what I learned from books that I missed everything the real world was trying to teach me." Claire studied him for a long moment. "You graduated top of your class at the K-9 Training Center." "Yes, ma'am." "You scored highest on every written examination, every theoretical assessment, every simulation exercise." "Yes, ma'am." His voice was smaller now. "And none of that prepared you for what happened last night." Sloane's head dropped. "No, ma'am, it didn't." Claire leaned forward. "Do you know why?" He looked up, surprise flickering across his features. "Because I was arrogant?" "No." "Well, yes, but that's not the main reason." Claire's voice softened. "It's because you were trained to think of dogs as equipment, as tools to be maintained and operated, as systems to be understood and controlled. But they're not." No, they're not. Claire reached down, placed her hand on Havoc's head. The dog had followed her into the room and was lying at her feet, his eyes fixed on Sloane with an intensity that made the younger man uncomfortable. They're partners, companions, family, and you can't learn that from a book. You can't score it on an exam. You can only learn it by putting in the time, by building the trust, by being willing to love something that can't tell you it loves you back, and trusting that the loyalty is real anyway. Sloane was silent. Then, can I learn it? Is it possible for someone like me to learn what you know? Claire considered the question. That depends on you. She stood, and Havoc rose with her. I'm returning to the program. The Phantom Pack is being revived, and I'll be leading the training division. If you're serious about learning, not just learning how to handle dogs, but learning how to partner with them, then I'll give you a chance. Hope flickered in Sloane's eyes. And if I'm not serious? Then you'll wash out within a week, and we'll both save ourselves the trouble. Claire moved toward the door. Think about it, petty officer. Really think, because the path I'm offering isn't easier than the one you were on. It's harder, much harder, but it leads somewhere worth going. She left him there, contemplating a future he hadn't known existed until a few hours ago. The conversation with Megan Ashford was different. The lieutenant sat rigid in her chair, her mascara smeared from crying, her perfectly manicured nails bitten down to the quick. When Claire entered, she didn't stand, didn't speak, just stared at the table like it held the answers to questions she was afraid to ask. Lieutenant, Claire said, taking her seat. Don't, Megan's voice was hoarse. Don't be nice to me. I don't deserve it. I wasn't planning on being nice. Claire's tone was matter-of-fact. I was planning on being honest. Megan finally looked up. Last night you grabbed my chin, forced my face up, demanded that I answer you. Claire's eyes were steady, unblinking. Do you remember what I felt in that moment? Megan shook her head. Nothing. Claire let the word hang in the air. I felt nothing. Because I've had my chin grabbed by people who actually meant to hurt me. I've been in situations where a hand on my face meant the difference between life and death. Your power play in a bar was so insignificant compared to what I've survived that it didn't even register as a threat. Megan flinched. That's not meant to diminish what you did, Claire continued. It was cruel. It was unprofessional. It was beneath the uniform you wear. But it also came from a place I recognize. A place I've seen in 100 officers who felt like they had to prove themselves because nobody took them seriously. Something shifted in Megan's expression. How did you... Because I was you once. A woman in a male-dominated field, constantly having to prove that she belonged, constantly having to be harder, colder, meaner than everyone around her just to be taken seriously. Claire's voice softened slightly. The difference is, I found another way. I learned that strength doesn't have to look like dominance. That power doesn't have to look like control. What does it look like? It looks like trust. Claire gestured to Havoc, who had curled up at her feet. That dog has killed enemy combatants. He's taken down armed hostiles twice his size. He could tear out my throat in seconds if he wanted to, but he doesn't, because he trusts me, because I earned that trust through patience and kindness and consistency, not through force. Megan stared at Havoc with new eyes. I don't know how to be that person, she admitted quietly. I don't know how to lead without being what I was last night. Then learn. Claire stood. Your career isn't over, Lieutenant. Not unless you want it to be. But it does need to change. The question is whether you are willing to do the work. She left without waiting for an answer. Some lessons had to be learned alone. The last conversation was with Victor Tran. The senior chief was different from the others. Older, more experienced. He had served in combat, had seen what war really looked like, and had recognized something in Claire that the younger handlers had missed. Ma'am. He rose when she entered, his salute crisp and proper. At ease, senior chief. Claire took her seat. You weren't part of the harassment last night. Why did you ask to see me? Tran remained standing. Because I should have stopped it. His voice was heavy with self-recrimination. I knew something was wrong from the moment you corrected Sloane. The way you moved, the way you carried yourself, it all screamed military training. But I didn't say anything. I just watched. Why? Because I was curious. Tran's jaw tightened. I wanted to see how far it would go. I wanted to see if I was right about you. And by the time I realized I was, it was too late. Dunn had already called for havoc, and everything had spiraled beyond recovery. Claire studied him. You're blaming yourself for the actions of others. I'm blaming myself for not taking action when action was needed. Tran finally met her eyes. I've served for 22 years, ma'am. I've seen good officers and bad ones. I've seen leaders who inspire and leaders who destroy. And I've learned that the moments that define us aren't the big battles. They're the small choices. The decisions to speak up or stay silent, to act or observe. And you chose wrong. Yes, ma'am, I did. Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm rebuilding the Phantom Pack program. I need experienced personnel. People who understand that working with dogs isn't about technique alone. People who have seen enough of the world to know that the best weapon isn't always the loudest one. Tran's expression flickered. Ma'am, I'm offering you a position, Senior Chief. Not because you have earned it, but because everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes. She stood. The question is whether you'll take it. Tran was silent for a long moment. Then he saluted again, sharper this time, with purpose. It would be an honor, ma'am. Claire returned the salute. Report to the K9 facility at 0600 tomorrow. Bring your humility. She left Building 12 as the sun rose fully over Virginia Beach, painting the world in shades of gold and possibility. Behind her, 3 handlers sat in separate rooms, contemplating futures that had been shattered and rebuilt in the span of a single night. Ahead of her, a program waited to be revived, and somewhere in the shadows, a traitor watched and waited, planning his next move against a woman who refused to stay dead. 3 weeks later, Claire stood in the center of the newly renovated K9 training facility, watching a class of handlers work with their K9 partners. The improvements were visible everywhere: better equipment, better facilities, better methods. But more importantly, there was a different energy in the air. The dogs were engaged, happy, eager to work with their handlers instead of merely tolerating them. And the handlers themselves had changed. Derek Sloan knelt beside a young Belgian Malinois, speaking to her in low, gentle tones as he guided her through a scent detection exercise. Gone was the smug certainty, replaced by a quiet focus that served him much better. Megan Ashford was running agility drills with a German Shepherd, her commands clear but kind, her body language open and encouraging instead of domineering. Even Victor Tran had found his place, supervising the advanced tactical training with a patience he hadn't known he possessed. They're doing well. Claire turned to find Rosa Delgado standing beside her, a cup of coffee in each hand. They're trying. Claire accepted the coffee gratefully. That's what matters. The Admiral called again this morning. Rosa's voice was carefully neutral. Any updates on the Kane situation? Claire's expression darkened. 3 weeks, and they were no closer to finding him. Every lead had dead-ended. Every sighting had proven false. Marcus Kane had vanished like the ghost he had become, leaving nothing but questions in his wake. Nothing concrete. Intel suggests he's gone to ground somewhere in Eastern Europe. Beyond that, she shrugged. We wait. And if he comes here, to you? Claire looked out at the training field, at the dogs and handlers working together in the morning light. Then I'll be ready. The answer came sooner than she expected. That evening, after the facility had quieted and most of the personnel had gone home, Claire sat in her new office, reviewing training reports by lamplight. Havoc slept at her feet, his breathing slow and even, his presence a comfort that had become essential to her daily routine. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Claire stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she answered. Hello? Silence on the other end. The kind of silence that meant someone was listening, waiting, measuring. Then a voice she hadn't heard in 6 years. Ghost Mother. Long time no see. Claire's blood went cold. Talon. A laugh, soft and familiar and utterly wrong in its context. You remember. I'm touched. What do you want, Marcus? What I've always wanted. You, your methods, your secrets. A pause. Your dogs. Claire's hand tightened on the phone. The Phantom Pack protocols aren't for sale. Everything is for sale, ma'am. You taught me that. You taught me that loyalty could be built, that trust could be manufactured, that even love could be trained into existence. His voice hardened. And then you taught me the most important lesson of all, that none of it was real, that when push came to shove, you would sacrifice anyone and anything to complete the mission. That's not true. Isn't it? Kane's voice was bitter. Kandahar, the extraction point. 14 hours of combat while you sat in the center, protected by your precious Ds, while the rest of us bled and died around you. I was wounded. I couldn't move. The dogs chose you. Over us, over their handlers, over everything we had built together. His voice cracked. I watched Jenkins die, ma'am. I watched his dog step over his body to take a position defending you. His partner of 4 years chose you over him in his final moments. How do you think that felt? Claire closed her eyes. I didn't ask them to. You didn't have to. That's the point. Kane's voice steadied. You created something, Ghost Mother, something powerful, something that transcends normal loyalty. And when I realized what it was, when I understood that the dogs would always choose you over anyone else, I knew I had to make a choice. So, you sold us out. I protected myself. The same way you taught me to protect myself. The same way you protected yourself by letting others die while you survived. 7 dogs died that day, Marcus. 7 of my children. And 3 handlers, my friends, my brothers. A long pause. We all lost something at Kandahar, ma'am. The difference is, I decided to make sure I never lost anything again. Claire took a deep breath. What do you want? I want the protocols, all of them. Every technique, every method, every secret you've been holding back from the official program. His voice lowered. Give them to me and I disappear. You never hear from me again. The people I work for get what they want, and everyone goes on with their lives. And if I refuse, silence. Then, look out your window. Claire moved to the window, her heart pounding. Across the darkened parking lot, a black SUV sat with its lights off. Inside, she could make out a figure watching her office. I know where you are, Kane said softly. I know where you live. I know where your dogs sleep. I know where Havoc's kennel is, and Coda's, and Phantom's, and Whisper's. I know everything, Ghost Mother, because you taught me how to know everything. If you touch them, I don't want to touch them. I just want the protocols. Give them to me, and this ends. Refuse, and... Another pause. Well, you know how this works. You trained me, after all. The line went dead. Claire stood at the window, staring at the SUV, her mind racing. Then, slowly, she smiled. You're wrong about one thing, Marcus. She spoke to the empty room, knowing he couldn't hear her, knowing it didn't matter. I didn't teach you everything. She reached for her phone and dialed Commander Briggs. Commander, I need the Phantom Pack assembled. All of them. Tonight. A pause on the other end. Ma'am? Kane just made contact. He's here, and he's threatening my dogs. Claire's voice hardened into steel. It's time to show him what the pack does to people who threaten our family. She hung up and looked down at Havoc, who had risen to his feet, his body tense with anticipation. What do you say, boy? Ready to teach your old student one final lesson? Havoc's tail wagged once, sharp and decisive. And in the darkness outside, the black SUV sat waiting, its occupant unaware that the trap he thought he was setting had just been turned around. Ghost Mother was alive, her dogs were ready, and this time, she wouldn't be the one running. She knelt beside Havoc, placed her forehead against his, and spoke the words that had started everything. Oscar Mike 7. The dog's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. Outside, the night waited. And somewhere in the darkness, a reckoning was coming. For Ghost Mother, for her children, and for the traitor who had forgotten the most important lesson of all. Dogs never forget who loved them first, and neither do the women who train them.